Julia Lane lay in the sterile confines of the military hospital, the antiseptic scent sharp in her nostrils. Her right leg bandaged tightly where a shell fragment had been removed throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. The border regiment's infirmary was a Spartan affair, white walls, metal cots, and the constant hum of activity beyond the thin partition. Soldiers moved with purpose outside their boots, echoing on the concrete floor, a reminder of the world she'd been torn from. Julia's dark hair, usually pulled into a tight bun, spilled loosely over the pillow, framing a face etched with exhaustion and resolve. She was a reconnaissance soldier, one of the best in the 2nd Battalion, and yet here she was, sidelined, her future uncertain. 2 years ago, this hospital would have been unthinkable. Back then, Julia and Captain Michael Leu were an unbreakable team, their names synonymous with precision and courage along the border. They'd met during a training exercise, a grueling simulation in the rugged hills where dust clung to their uniforms and the air crackled with simulated gunfire. With his sharp jawline and steady green eyes, Michael had been the first to notice Julia's knack for reading terrain. He'd said that you see things others miss, a rare smile breaking through his usual stoicism. That day, when she'd spotted a hidden ambush point, he'd clapped her shoulder, his touch lingering just long enough to spark something unspoken. Their partnership grew through countless missions, night patrols through dense forests, covert ops under starless skies, and high-stakes reconnaissance that left no room for error. They learned to anticipate each other's moves, communicating with a glance or a nod. Once, during a tense operation to secure a contested ridge, Michael had pulled her behind a boulder as enemy fire tore through the air. "Stay with me, Lane," he'd whispered, his breath warm against her ear. They'd held position for hours, hearts pounding until the threat passed. That night, under a rare clear sky, he'd shared stories of his grandfather, a war hero whose pocket watch he wore like a talisman. "It's my anchor," he'd said, pressing it into her hands. "Please keep it safe for me." Julia had clutched it, the metal cool against her palm, feeling the weight of his trust. Their bond deepened into love, a quiet, steadfast thing built on shared ideals. They dreamed of a future beyond the battlefield, a home where they could hang their uniforms and live for something other than duty. 6 months ago, they'd submitted a marriage application, a formality in the military's rigid bureaucracy. Michael had kissed her forehead in the records office, his lips soft against her skin. "This is our promise," he'd said, his voice low and certain. Julia had believed him, her heart full, imagining a life where they'd face every challenge. But now, lying in the hospital bed, that promise felt like a distant echo. Michael hadn't returned from the latest mission to suppress bandits in the southern hills, a campaign critical to securing the region. Whispers reached Julia through the hospital's grapevine. His troops had faltered, the mission compromised. Colleagues spoke in hushed tones, their glances heavy with expectation. They wanted her, the decorated scout, to vouch for him at headquarters, to smooth over whatever had gone wrong. But Julia's chest tightened at the thought. Something had shifted in Michael over the past 6 months, ever since Emily, a performer with the regiment's entertainment troupe, had arrived. With her delicate features and honeyed voice, Emily had a history with Michael, a childhood sweetheart, some said. Her presence seemed to pull him away, his attention drifting during briefings, his visits to Julia growing sparse. He'd dismissed Julia's concerns, calling her paranoid. "Emily's just a friend," he'd said, his tone clipped. But Julia had seen how he lingered near Emily's tent and how his eyes softened when she sang. The pocket watch, once a symbol of their bond, now hung around his neck, again reclaimed without explanation. As Julia stared at the hospital ceiling, the ache in her leg mirrored the one in her heart. She was no stranger to sacrifice, her career demanded it, but this felt different, personal. The man she'd trusted with her life and future was slipping away, and the regiment expected her to stand by him to uphold a loyalty she wasn't sure he deserved. Her fingers traced the edge of her bandage, the pain grounding her. She was Julia Lane, a soldier who'd faced death and never flinched. She would face it head-on, whatever Michael had done, whatever truth lay behind his absence. The bond they'd forged in duty was fraying, and Julia wasn't sure it could be salvaged or if she even wanted to try. The hospital ward buzzed with muted urgency, starkly contrasting the storm brewing in Julia Lane's heart. Propped up on her cot, her bandaged legs stiff and heavy, she gripped the thin blanket as if it could anchor her against the tide of doubt. The pain from her recent surgery pulsed in rhythm with her thoughts, each throb a reminder of the mission that had gone so wrong. Outside the border regiment's camp churned with activity, soldiers drilling jeeps, rumbling voices barking orders. But inside, the air was thick with expectation, all eyes on Julia. Captain Michael Leu, her fiancé, was still absent, his troops straggling back from a botched operation to suppress bandits in the southern hills. Whispers had reached her through the hospital's thin walls. The mission had faltered, losses were heavy, and headquarters demanded answers. Julia, a decorated reconnaissance soldier, was their best hope to salvage Michael's reputation. Two colleagues, Lieutenants Harris and Chen, stood at the foot of her bed, their faces a mix of sympathy and insistence. Harris, a wiry man with a perpetual frown, cleared his throat. "Julia, you're the only one who can speak for Captain Leu. The headquarters is pressing for a report, and your word carries weight." Julia's dark eyes narrowed, her jaw tightening. She'd spent years earning her place in the 2nd Battalion, her reconnaissance reports flawless, her instincts razor sharp. But now they wanted her to vouch for Michael, to weave a narrative shielding him from blame. The thought churned her stomach. "I'm not his keeper," she said, her voice low but firm. "He led the mission. Let him explain his failures." Chen, softer spoken but no less persistent, stepped closer. "Come on, Julia. You're engaged. You know how this works. The battalion looks out for its own. If Michael takes the fall, it reflects on all of us." He gestured vaguely toward her leg. "You were there too. Your intel set the operation in motion. You could share the load and soften the blow if there was a mistake." The words landed like a slap. Her intel had been meticulous, delivered to the regiment's commander 10 hours before the operation began. She'd risked her life to map the enemy's positions, crawling through mud and thorns to ensure accuracy. However, the mission unraveled not because of her report, but because of Michael's choices. The memory flashed unbidden, his voice crackling over the radio, urgent and distracted, as he diverted forces to answer a distress call from Emily, the performer who'd once held his heart. He'd flashed the Jeep's headlights to signal her a reckless move that pinpointed Julia's position to the enemy. The bullet that tore through her leg had been the consequence, the shell fragment, a cruel memento of his betrayal. "Michael didn't fail because of my intel," Julia said, her voice rising sharp with suppressed fury. "He split his troops to save Emily, his white moonlight. He exposed my coordinates, left me in the crossfire. If you want someone to blame, look at him." The room fell silent. Harris and Chen exchanging uneasy glances. Emily's name hung in the air like a specter. 6 months ago, her arrival shifted everything. Her soft smiles and lilting songs drew Michael's attention like a moth to flame. Julia had tried to ignore it, to trust his assurances, but the truth was undeniable now. Harris shifted uncomfortably. "Julia, we get it. You're hurt, and not just your leg. But think about the bigger picture. You and Michael are a team. If you don't back him, the whole battalion suffers. Headquarters won't care about personal grudges." His tone softened, almost pleading. "You're his fiancé. That means something." The word fiancé stung more than her wound. It was a title that once filled her with pride, a promise of shared dreams. Now it felt like a shackle binding her to a man who'd chosen another. Julia's fingers dug into the blanket, her resolve hardening. She wouldn't let them guilt her into silence, not when Michael's actions had cost lives, not when her blood stained the battlefield because of him. "I'm done protecting him," she said, each word deliberate. "He made his choice. Now I'm making mine." Ignoring the pain that flared with every movement, Julia swung her legs over the cot's edge. Her injured leg protested, the bandages straining, but she gritted her teeth and stood leaning heavily on the bed frame. Harris stepped forward, alarmed. "Julia, what are you doing? You're not cleared to move." She waved him off, her eyes fixed on the door. "I need to get to the records office. Now." Chen tried to block her path, his voice urgent. "You're not thinking straight. If you walk away from Michael, you're burning bridges. The regiment won't forget this." Julia met his gaze, unflinching. "Let them remember. I'm not the one who broke faith." With a strength born of anger and heartbreak, she limped past them, her steps uneven but determined. The hospital corridor stretched before her, a gauntlet of curious stares from nurses and orderlies. Each step sent a jolt of pain through her leg, but it fueled her resolve. The records office was a small, cluttered room at the camp's edge, its walls lined with filing cabinets and the faint smell of ink lingering in the air. The clerk, a bespectacled private, looked up in surprise as Julia staggered in her face, pale but resolute. "I need our marriage application," she said, her voice steady despite the sweat on her brow. "Lane and Leu submitted 6 months ago." The clerk hesitated, glancing at her bandages, but her glare silenced any protest. He rummaged through a drawer and handed her a crisp folder. Julia opened it, her hands trembling slightly. There it was, the document she and Michael had signed, their names intertwined in neat official script. It had been a moment of hope, a vow to face the future together. Now it mocked her, a relic of a trust that no longer existed. Without a word, she gripped the paper and tore it in half, then again the sound sharp in the quiet room. The clerk gasped, but Julia didn't falter. She let the fragments fall to the floor, her heart pounding with a mix of grief and liberation. As she limped back to the hospital, the weight of her decision settled over her. She'd severed the bond that tied her to Michael not just as a fiancé, but as a partner in the regiment's eyes. The consequences would be swift whispers, judgment, perhaps even isolation. But Julia didn't care. She'd given everything to the 2nd Battalion to Michael, and he'd repaid her with betrayal. She would face whatever came next, as she always had, alone, unbroken, and true to herself. The hospital ward felt smaller, the walls closing in as Julia Lane sat upright on her cot, her injured leg a heavy anchor. The bandages around her thigh were fresh, but the pain beneath them gnawed relentlessly, a constant reminder of the mission that had shattered her trust. Her dark eyes sharp and unyielding, fixed on the 3 figures before her: Lieutenant Harris, Lieutenant Chen, and Major Whitaker, a senior officer whose presence carried the weight of authority. The air was thick with tension, the hum of the camp outside muffled by the ward's thin partition. Julia's hands rested on her blanket, fingers clenched, bracing for the confrontation she knew was coming. Major Whitaker, a broad-shouldered man with graying temples, stood at the foot of her bed, his arms crossed. His voice was measured but firm, the kind that brooked no nonsense. Lieutenant Lane, we're in a bind. Captain Leu's mission failed, and headquarters is breathing down our necks for answers. You were the reconnaissance officer. Your report set the operation in motion. We need you to clarify what went wrong, preferably in a way that keeps the 2nd Battalion intact. His eyes softened slightly, but the expectation was clear she would shoulder part of the blame. Julia's jaw tightened, her pulse quickening. She'd spent years proving her worth, her reconnaissance reports lauded for precision. Her latest had been no different, delivered to the regiment's commander 10 hours before the operation, every detail meticulously verified. But Michael Leu, her former fiancé, had derailed it all, diverting forces to rescue Emily, the performer who'd rekindled his old affections. His reckless signal, a jeep's headlights flashing to guide Emily, had exposed Julia's position, leaving her wounded and the mission in ruins. She'd torn up their marriage application, but the regiment still saw her as his partner, bound by duty to protect him. Julia said, I've already submitted my report, her voice steady despite the pain radiating from her leg. The intel was accurate. If there's a problem, ask Captain Leu why he split his troops to chase a distress call that wasn't part of the plan. Her words cut through the room, sharp and unapologetic. Harris shifted uncomfortably, his frown deepening, while Chen glanced at the floor, avoiding her gaze. Whitaker's brow furrowed, his tone taking on a harder edge. Captain Leu hasn't returned to make his report, and the battalion's reputation is on the line. You're his fiancé, Lane. Husband and wife are one in the eyes of the regiment. If you don't stand by him, you let personal feelings cloud your judgment. That's not what we expect from a soldier of your caliber. The word fiancé stung, a reminder of the bond she'd severed. Julia's fingers dug into the blanket, her knuckles whitening. I'm not his fiancé, she corrected, her voice cold. I ended our engagement yesterday, and I won't lie to cover his mistakes. He prioritized a civilian performer over the mission, exposed my coordinates, and cost us the operation. Those are the facts. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling like dust. Harris opened his mouth, then closed it, his argument faltering under her glare. Chen stepped forward, his voice softer, almost pleading. Julia, we're not asking you to lie. Soften the report. Admit a small error in your intel. It may be a miscalculation. It'll spread the blame, keep the heat off Michael. The battalion can't afford to lose him or you. Think about what this means for your career. His eyes flicked to her bandaged leg, as if her injury made her more pliable, more desperate to prove her loyalty. The suggestion ignited a spark of fury in Julia's chest. Her career was built on integrity, risking her life to deliver truth, not half-truths. She'd crawled through enemy territory, her heart pounding as she memorized coordinates, all to ensure her comrades' safety. Michael's betrayal had nearly cost her life, and now they wanted her to dilute her honor to save his skin. She said, my career isn't built on excuses, her voice rising. My report was handed to the commander yesterday afternoon, verified and approved. If Michael ignored it, that's on him, not me. He's the commanding officer. He made the call. Whitaker's expression darkened, his patience thinning. You're being stubborn, Lane. This isn't just about you or Lou. The entire battalion's morale is at stake. If you push this, you're painting Captain Leu as incompetent, and that reflects on all of us. You'll be the one they whisper about, the woman who turned alone. His words carried a veiled threat, the kind that could haunt her in the regiment's tight-knit ranks. Julia met his gaze unflinching. She'd faced worse than whispers, enemy fire, sleepless nights, the searing pain of a bullet. The regiment could judge her, but she wouldn't betray herself. Compared to the lives lost in that operation, a reputation means nothing. She said each word deliberate. I've given headquarters the truth. They'll have to find someone else to make them if they want excuses. Her voice rang out in the quiet ward, a hammer striking steel, leaving no room for argument. The officers exchanged glances, their resolve wavering. Harris muttered something under his breath, but Whitaker raised a hand, silencing him. We'll see what Captain Leu has to say when he returns, he said, his tone clipped. But know this, Lane, your refusal won't be forgotten. He turned on his heel, Harris and Chen following their footsteps fading down the corridor. Julia exhaled the tension draining from her shoulders, leaving only the ache in her leg and a hollow ache in her chest. She'd drawn a line, one that might cost her allies perhaps even her place in the battalion. But as she leaned back against the pillow, her resolve held firm. Michael's betrayal had shattered their bond, and the regiment's pressure couldn't force her to rebuild it. She was a soldier, not a pawn, and she would face whatever came next with the same courage that had carried her through the battlefield. The truth was her weapon now, and she would wield it without hesitation. The hospital ward was quiet now, the bustle of the border regiment's camp reduced to a distant murmur beyond the window. Julia Lane lay back on her cot, the ache in her bandaged leg, a steady pulse grounding her in the present. Her confrontation with Major Whitaker and the lieutenants lingered like a bitter aftertaste, their words echoing in her mind. You're his fiancé. Husband and wife are one. She was no longer Michael Leu's fiancé, but the regiment's expectations clung to her heavy as the blanket draped across her lap. Along with her thoughts, Julia's gaze drifted to the ceiling, and her mind slipped back to a time when trust had been her anchor, when Michael had been her partner in every sense. 2 years ago, the border was a wild, untamed expanse, its hills scarred by conflict and its nights thick with tension. Julia, a newly promoted reconnaissance officer, had been assigned to a high-stakes mission to secure a contested ridge, a vantage point critical to the regiment's defense. The operation was perilous. Enemy scouts patrolled the area, their movements unpredictable, and the terrain was a maze of jagged rocks and dense scrub. Captain Michael Leu, a rising star in the 2nd Battalion, led the team. His reputation for cool-headedness preceded him, but his quiet confidence drew Julia's attention during the briefing, his green eyes scanning the topographic map with surgical precision. The mission began under a moonless sky, the team moving in silence, their breaths shallow to avoid detection. Julia's role was to scout ahead, her instincts honed to spot traps where others saw only shadows. She moved like a ghost, her boots barely disturbing the earth, her encrypted notepad clutched tightly. Michael followed close behind, his presence a steady reassurance. Halfway up the ridge, a crackle of gunfire shattered the stillness. Enemy scouts had spotted them. Down, Michael hissed, pulling Julia behind a boulder as bullets ricocheted off the rocks. Her heart pounded, adrenaline flooding her veins, but his hand on her shoulder was a lifeline. Stay with me, Lane, he said, his voice low but unwavering. We'll get through this. They held their position for hours, pinned down by sporadic fire. Michael's calm never faltered. He whispered coordinates to the team, directing their counterattack with the precision of a conductor. Pressed against the boulder, Julia relayed her observations, enemy positions, movement patterns, her voice steady despite the chaos. Between bursts of gunfire, they shared fleeting glances, a silent pact that they'd see this through together. When the enemy finally retreated, driven back by the team's coordinated push, dawn was breaking, painting the ridge in hues of gold and shadow. Exhausted but victorious, the team regrouped at the ridge's crest. Julia sat on a flat stone, her uniform streaked with dirt, her notepad filled with critical intel. Michael approached, his face smudged with grime but softened by a rare smile. You were incredible out there, he said, sitting beside her. I've never seen anyone read terrain like that. Julia shrugged, deflecting the praise, but her cheeks warmed under his gaze. They sat in companionable silence, watching the sunrise, and the world felt briefly peaceful. Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver pocket watch, its surface worn but gleaming faintly in the light. This was my grandfather's, he said, his voice quiet. He carried it through 2 wars and said it kept him grounded. Please hold on to it. He pressed it into her hands, the metal cool against her palm. Julia's breath caught the gesture, carrying a weight beyond words. She promised I'll keep it safe, her fingers closing around it. Their bond felt unbreakable in that moment, forged in the crucible of shared danger and mutual respect. Over the following months, the watch symbolized their growing love. They stole moments between missions, quiet talks under starlit skies, shared laughter over mess hall coffee. Michael spoke of a future beyond the border, a home where they could leave the weight of duty behind. Julia, practical but hopeful, believed in that dream. When they submitted their marriage application 6 months ago, the watch had been in her pocket, a talisman of their commitment. Michael had kissed her forehead, his lips warm, and said, "This is our promise, Julia. You and me, always." Now back in the hospital, the memory stung like a fresh wound. Julia's fingers twitched, half expecting to feel the watch's familiar weight, but it was gone, returned to Michael in the months before Emily's arrival. With her soft voice and history with Michael, Emily had changed everything. His attention had drifted, his visits to Julia growing rare, his assurances hollow. The watch was back around his neck, a silent reclamation of the trust he'd once given her. The regiment still saw them as a unit, but Julia knew the truth. The man who'd shielded her on that ridge was gone, replaced by someone who'd left her to bleed for another's sake. Julia closed her eyes, the hospital's sterile scent pulling her back to the present. The Ridge mission had shown her what partnership could be, but it also sharpened the pain of Michael's betrayal. She'd torn up their marriage application, but the regiment's pressure to defend him tested her resolve. As sleep tugged at her, Julia clung to one certainty: the truth was hers to protect, just as she'd once protected that watch. She would face whatever came next with the same courage that had carried her to that ridge's crest alone if she had to. Rain lashed the border hills, a torrential downpour that turned the earth to mud and blurred the horizon. Julia Lane crouched in a shallow trench, her reconnaissance gear sodden, her dark hair plastered to her face. The encrypted topographic map in her hands was smeared but legible, its coordinates guiding the 2nd Battalion's plan to encircle a bandit stronghold. As the regiment's top scout, Julia's role was critical: navigate the treacherous terrain, confirm enemy positions, and ensure safe passage for the assault team. Her heart pounded not from fear but from the weight of responsibility. This mission could cripple the enemy's hold on the region, and she was its linchpin. Captain Michael Leu, her former partner and now estranged fiancé, led the operation from a forward position. His orders were clear: neutralize the enemy's firepower at dawn, paving the way for the encirclement. Julia had delivered her report 10 hours earlier, and every detail was verified under the regiment's scrutiny. She trusted Michael to execute the plan. They'd run missions like this before, their synergy honed over the years. But the memory of his recent distance, his preoccupation with Emily, the performer who'd rekindled his past, gnawed at her. She pushed the thought aside, focusing on the map's contours, her fingers tracing the path ahead. The radio at her side crackled static, cutting through the rain's roar. Julia adjusted the frequency, expecting Michael's update. Instead, a panicked voice burst through Emily's, trembling with fear. "Michael, please help me. Our convoy's been ambushed. I'm so scared." Julia's stomach dropped. The performing troop's route overlapped with her withdrawal path, a detail she'd shared with Michael. Her grip tightened on the radio, dread pooling in her chest. Before she could respond, Michael's voice cut in, calm but urgent. "Julia, please give me your radio. Now." "No," she said, her voice firm despite the rain streaming down her face. "The encirclement's about to start. You can't divert forces now." The mission had been planned for a year, and every move was calculated to avoid chaos. Michael's tone hardened, a mocking edge creeping in. "This isn't the time for jealousy, Julia. Emily's in danger. Civilian lives matter more than your feelings." His words stung sharper than the cold biting her skin. "You're the one acting strange," she snapped. "This operation is bigger than one person. How can you throw it away for her?" Michael's patience snapped. "You know damn well I wouldn't have settled for you if Emily hadn't left," he said, his voice low and cruel. "Be grateful you even had a chance." The words hit like a physical blow, freezing Julia in place. 6 months ago, their marriage application had symbolized a shared future. Now he dismissed it as a compromise. Rain mingled with the heat in her eyes, but she refused to let tears fall. Michael pressed on, his tone desperate. "I'll be back in an hour. I won't miss the assault window. Just wait for my signal." He lunged for the radio, but Julia jerked it away, her resolve steeling. She handed him the pocket watch he'd once given her, its silver surface slick with rain. "If you're so set on saving her, we're done," she said, her voice steady. "Take it back," Michael muttered. "You're being ridiculous," stuffing the watch into his pocket. He patted her shoulder dismissively. "I'll explain when I'm back with Emily." He vanished into the storm without another glance, leaving Julia alone in the trench. She tightened her grip on the map, determination overriding her pain. The mission couldn't fail because of Michael's choices. She pressed forward, navigating the muddy terrain toward the designated clearing. Across the valley, a jeep's headlights flashed 3 times a signal they'd practiced for safe passage. Her heart leapt, hope flickering. Maybe Michael had returned to the plan. She quickened her pace, stepping into the exposed clearing, the cliffs on either side offering no cover. A gunshot shattered the night pane, exploding in her right leg. Julia stumbled, collapsing into the mud, her map slipping from her grasp. Blood seeped through her uniform, warm against the cold rain. She clutched her leg, gasping, her vision swimming. Above on the cliff, the jeep's headlights illuminated 2 figures. Michael, his arm around Emily, his face tender as he comforted her. The 3 flashes hadn't been for Julia. They were his signal to guide Emily to safety, using their code to lure Julia into an ambush. Betrayal burned hotter than the wound. The storm swallowed Julia's cries for help, her strength ebbing as she slid down a rocky slope. She wedged herself between slick boulders, her hands trembling as she tore off her sleeve to bind the wound. Despair threatened to overwhelm her, but she bit down hard, forcing herself to focus. She was a reconnaissance officer trained to survive, to deliver the truth no matter the cost. Michael had chosen Emily, but Julia would choose the mission, the regiment herself. As darkness closed in, she clung to that resolve, her bloodied hands gripping the rocks, refusing to let go. The rain-soaked night pressed down on Julia Lane, its relentless drumming a cruel counterpoint to the searing pain in her right leg. Wedged between slick, mossy boulders at the base of a ravine, she fought to stay conscious, her bloodied hands clutching the makeshift tourniquet she'd fashioned from her sleeve. The bullet wound throbbed each pulse, threatening to drag her into darkness, but Julia's will was iron. She was a reconnaissance officer of the 2nd Battalion, trained to endure, to turn chaos into clarity. Michael Leu's betrayal, his choice to save Emily and lure Julia into an ambush, burned in her chest, but she wouldn't let it break her. The mission, the regiment, depended on her survival. Her breaths came in shallow gasps, the cold mud soaking through her uniform. The topographic map she'd carried was lost in the fall, but her mind held its details. Enemy positions, escape routes, the stakes of the operation. Above the jeep's headlights had vanished Michael and Emily, gone, their silhouettes etched in her memory. The 3 flashes, a signal meant for life-or-death missions, had been twisted to guide Emily, exposing Julia to enemy fire. The betrayal cut deeper than the bullet, but also sharpened her focus. She had to live to uncover the truth. Groping through the mud, Julia's fingers brushed a small, hard object. She squinted in the faint, pre-dawn light, her vision swimming but resolute. It was a battery fragment, its deep green casing scuffed, bearing faded letters. Her heart skipped. This was no ordinary battery. It belonged to a new radio set issued exclusively to the regiment's performing troop. What was it doing here in a ravine far from their convoy? Suspicion flared, her scout's instincts kicking in. She tucked the fragment into her pocket, her hands trembling from pain and cold. Her gaze fell to the muddy ground nearby, freshly washed by the rain. There, clear as a signature, was a footprint, its distinctive tread unmistakable. Julia had seen it before on the soles of Emily's performance shoes, designed for stage grip, as Emily had once boasted. The pieces clicked together, the battery, the footprint, Emily's distress call that had pulled Michael away. This wasn't just a mistake, it was treachery. Emily had been at the ambush site, possibly leaking the mission's plan. The thought sent a chill down Julia's spine, colder than the rain. She forced herself to sit up, biting back a groan as pain lanced through her leg. Despair clawed at her, but she shoved it aside. The 2nd Battalion's fate rested on her shoulders. She had to get this evidence to headquarters to warn them before the enemy exploited the mission's collapse. Her radio was gone, snatched by Michael, but Julia's training ran deeper than equipment. She scanned the ravine, her eyes catching a glint of metal among the rocks. Crawling forward, each movement agony, she unearthed a shattered military radio, its casing cracked, antenna bent. Her hands, slick with blood and mud, worked with practiced precision. She pried open the radio's casing, rewiring its guts by touch, her fingers steady, despite the tremors racking her body. The pain was a distant scream, now drowned out by determination. She switched channels, static, hissing like a lifeline. Minutes stretched into eternity, her vision blurring, but she kept at it, whispering to herself, "Come on." Finally, a burst of static gave way to a voice faint but unmistakable. "Red River, confirm your coordinates." Julia's heart leapt. Red River, this is Scout Lane, she rasped, her voice hoarse but firm. Enemy ambush at Sector 4. Suspected leak from the performing troop. I have evidence, a battery fragment, a footprint. Send extraction. She relayed her approximate position, each word a battle against the darkness creeping into her vision. The operator's voice crackled back urgent. Hold position, Lane. We're dispatching a team. Stay alive. The connection cut out, static returning, but Julia exhaled relief mingling with exhaustion. She slumped against the boulder, clutching the battery fragment and pressing the footprint's outline into a bandage for preservation. These were her proof, her weapon against the betrayal that had nearly killed her. Emily's involvement was no longer a hunch but a certainty, and Michael's blind trust had enabled it. The thought of his tender embrace with Emily, illuminated by the Jeep's headlights, twisted in her gut, but Julia channeled the pain into resolve. She'd trusted Michael once, loved him, but that was over. The regiment was her family now, and she'd protect it, even if it cost her everything. The rain slowed to a drizzle, the first light of dawn creeping over the hills. Julia's strength was fading, her leg a dead weight, but she refused to surrender. She fumbled for a stick in the mud, using it to prop herself up, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The extraction team would come, and she would have her chance to expose the truth with them. She was Julia Lane, reconnaissance officer, and she'd survived worse than this. As her consciousness wavered, she held the evidence tightly, a silent vow to see justice done no matter the cost. The hospital ward was a blur of antiseptic white and muted voices, as Julia Lane lay on her cot, the pain in her bandaged leg, a constant companion. The extraction team had found her in the ravine, half-conscious, but clutching the battery fragment, and preserved footprint evidence of Emily's treachery. Now back in the 2nd Battalion's infirmary, Julia's body was weak, but her resolve burned bright. She'd survived Michael Leu's betrayal, delivered critical intel to headquarters, and exposed a potential traitor. Yet as she stared at the ceiling, a new battle loomed that would test her heart as much as her strength. The ward's door swung open with a sharp creak, and Michael stormed in, his uniform splattered with mud, his green eyes blazing with anger. Behind him, Emily hovered, her delicate frame wrapped in a bandage around her finger, her expression a mask of wounded innocence. The metallic stench of blood mingled with the sweet tang of Emily's perfume, an incongruous assault on Julia's senses. Michael's presence filled the room, his broad shoulders tense, his voice cold and cutting. Julia Lane, how much damage have you caused the battalion? Julia's heart clenched, not from fear but from the sting of his words. This was the man she'd once loved, the partner who'd shielded her on a contested ridge and pressed his grandfather's pocket watch into her hands as a vow. Now he stood before her, accusing her of the chaos his choices had wrought. She propped herself up, ignoring the pain in her leg, her dark eyes meeting his without flinching. "Captain Leu, what are you trying to say?" she asked, her voice steady, but trembling with suppressed fury. Michael stepped closer, his face a storm of indignation. "He said your faulty intel led us into a trap," his words slicing the air. "Emily says the route map for the performing troop came from you. It sent them straight into an ambush. If I hadn't split forces to save them, we'd have lost more than we did." Emily nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, her bandaged finger raised as if to underscore her fragility. She didn't speak, but her presence was a silent accusation, her delicate headshake a calculated plea for sympathy. Julia's breath caught the audacity of their claim, igniting a fire in her chest. Her reconnaissance report was meticulous and verified by the commander before the operation. The ambush had come because Michael diverted forces to rescue Emily, flashing the Jeep's headlights to guide her, exposing Julia's position. The bullet in her leg was proof of his recklessness, yet he stood here twisting the truth to shield his childhood sweetheart. "Captain Leu," she said, her voice low and deliberate, "whether I gave that map is unconfirmed. But you owe us an explanation for delaying the operation. You ignored the plan for her." Michael's expression flickered, a momentary crack in his bravado, but he quickly straightened, his voice rising. "I did it to save lives. We wouldn't have been in that mess if it weren't for your intel." His words were a deflection, but they cut deep, each one a reminder of the trust he'd shattered. Julia closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself against the wave of hurt. When she opened them, her gaze was steel. "What if I told you Emily lied?" she said, her voice rising with conviction. "What if she's involved in espionage? I have evidence, a battery fragment, a footprint proof she was at the ambush site." Michael's eyes widened, then narrowed, his face twisting with disbelief. "You're unbelievable, Julia," he said, his tone dripping with contempt. Emily said you'd do this make-up stories to tear her down. You'd go as far as hurting yourself to win my sympathy. He gestured to her bandaged leg, his words a cruel dismissal of her sacrifice. The battalion suffered enough, and you're here stirring up jealousy, using your injury to play the victim. Where's your sense of duty? The accusation hit like a cold wave, drowning the last vestiges of hope Julia had held for him. She stared at him, the man who'd once been her anchor, now a stranger, blinded by loyalty to another. Emily stepped closer to Michael, her voice soft and saccharine. Michael, don't be too hard on her, she said, her eyes darting to Julia with feigned concern. She's your fiancé. Naturally, she'd feel threatened. Maybe she didn't mean to cause trouble. Her words were a spark to kindling, fanning Michael's anger while painting Julia as petty. Julia said, I'm not his fiancé, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. And I'm not jealous. I'm a reconnaissance officer, and I swear on my honor there's no lie in what I said. She pulled back the blanket, revealing her leg, the bandages stained with fresh blood from her ordeal. This isn't for sympathy. It's what I endured because you chose her over the mission. Her voice trembled, not with weakness, but with fury, each word a hammer striking the silence. Michael's gaze faltered, his eyes lingering on her wound, but he shook his head, disgust replacing doubt. You're pathetic, Julia, he said, his voice low. I can't believe you'd stoop to this, accusing Emily when she nearly died out there. He clutched a paper bag likely containing her evidence, his knuckles white. You think you can pin this on her with scraps and lies? She's defenseless, a civilian. You're the one who failed us. Tears pricked Julia's eyes, not of self-pity but heartbreak, the final unraveling of the bond they'd shared. She looked from Michael to Emily, her vision blurring with exhaustion and pain. You'll regret this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of certainty. The room spun, her strength waning, but she held her ground, refusing to break. Michael turned away, his arm protecting Emily as if shielding her from Julia's truth. The door slammed behind them, leaving Julia alone, her heart a battlefield of grief and resolve. She'd lost Michael, but she hadn't lost herself. The evidence was out there, and she'd fight to see it heard, no matter the cost. The makeshift interrogation tent smelled of damp canvas and stale coffee, its dim lantern casting long shadows across the dirt floor. Julia Lane sat on a rigid stretcher, her bandaged leg throbbing with each heartbeat, the pain a relentless reminder of the ambush that had nearly claimed her life. 2 military police officers had brought her here from the hospital, their faces impassive as they ignored the blood seeping through her bandages. Now she faced 3 officers from the Military Regions Inspection Unit, their uniforms crisp, their expressions stern. The weight of suspicion hung heavy in the air, and Julia's dark eyes burned with defiance, her hands clenched to steady her nerves. Major Ellison, the lead inspector, sat across from her, his gray eyes piercing as he reviewed her report. Lieutenant Lane, he began, his voice clipped. The failure of the 107 anti-bandit operation has raised serious questions. Your reconnaissance report is at the center of this mess. We need your cooperation to determine what went wrong and whether you're complicit. The accusation stung, but Julia held his gaze, her jaw tight. She'd delivered her report 10 hours before the operation, and every coordinate was verified, yet Michael Leu's reckless decision to save Emily had turned it into chaos. Now they dared to question her integrity. I stand by every word in that report, Julia said, her voice steady despite the ache in her leg. I mapped the enemy positions myself, crawling through mud to confirm them. The operation failed because Captain Leu diverted forces to rescue a civilian performer, ignoring the plan. My evidence, a battery fragment and a footprint, points to her involvement in the ambush. She leaned forward, her words sharp with conviction. I'm not the one you should be questioning. Captain Ruiz, a younger officer with a skeptical frown, leaned in. Your evidence is circumstantial at best, Lane. A battery and a footprint don't prove espionage. Captain Leu claims your intel was flawed, leading the performing troupe into a trap. You were his fiancé. Personal bias could have clouded your judgment. The word fiancé cut deep, a reminder of the bond she'd severed. Julia's fingers dug into the stretcher's edge, her voice rising. I ended our engagement. My report was objective, verified by the commander. If Leu says otherwise, he's covering his own mistakes. The third officer, Lieutenant Kim, scribbled notes, her expression unreadable. She said, we've received Leu's initial field report. He states he acted to save lives, prioritizing the performer's distress call. Your report, however, details his inaction and unauthorized redeployment. These contradictions need resolving. Julia nodded, sweat beading on her forehead from the pain. He flashed the jeep's headlights to guide her, exposing my position. That's why I was shot. Check the logs, my radio transmission warned of the ambush. Before Ellison could respond, the tent flap burst open and Michael stormed in, dragging Emily behind him. His uniform was still mud-stained, his face pale but resolute. Emily's eyes were red, a handkerchief clutched in her bandaged hand, her delicate frame trembling. Commander Sir Michael saluted, his voice tight. Regarding the accusations against Lieutenant Lane, I have something to say. She's always had issues with Emily, personal grudges that skewed her report. Emily dabbed her eyes, her voice soft. Comrades, I don't know why Julia would say such things about me. I was just unlucky, caught in the ambush. Julia's heart pounded, fury and exhaustion warring within her. Michael's defense of Emily was a fresh betrayal, his words twisting her sacrifice into jealousy. She opened her mouth to retort, but Ellison raised a hand, silencing the room. His gaze shifted to Michael, cold and unyielding. Captain Leu, your report claims you acted to save lives, but Lane's logs detail specific instances of inaction, delaying the encirclement to rescue the performer. This led to missing the operational window. Explain yourself. Michael's face blanched, his confidence faltering. He opened his mouth, searching for words, but Emily interjected, her voice quivering. The enemy fire was too intense where we were pinned down. Michael had no choice. Ruiz's eyes narrowed. Comrade Emily, records show you had alternative communication with Captain Leu. Are you sure the enemy targeted your location specifically, or was it a setup? Emily's eyes flickered with panic, her response stuttering. I don't know anything about a setup. It was dangerous, that's all. Julia watched her chest tight with vindication and dread. Emily's faltering words hinted at the truth, but Michael's loyalty to her was unshaken. He stepped forward, his voice firm. Commander, I made a judgment call in a crisis. Lane's claims are speculation and slander to deflect her errors. His words were a blade cutting through the last threads of Julia's trust. She stared at him, the man who'd once been her partner, now a stranger defending a traitor. The tent flap flew open again, and a communications soldier, panting, burst in. Commander, emergency intel recon units in Zone 7 report a significant enemy buildup suggesting a considerable operation. The room froze, tension spiking. Zone 7, Julia had suspected the enemy might retreat there, a detail in her report. Michael seized the moment, his voice urgent. Commander, let me lead a recon team to Zone 7. I'll investigate and atone for any mistakes. Give me this chance. Ellison hesitated, his eyes flicking to Julia, then back to Michael. Very well, Captain Leu, he said. Succeed, or you'll answer for everything. Michael saluted, his posture rigid, and strode out without a glance at Julia or Emily. Emily watched him go, her fingers twisting her coat, her expression unreadable. Julia lay back on the stretcher, her body aching, but her mind racing. Zone 7 could hold the key to exposing Emily's treachery, but Michael's mission left her fate in limbo. The truth was out there, and she'd fight to see it through, no matter the doubt surrounding her. Julia Lane lay in the military hospital, her bandaged leg a throbbing anchor to the cot, but her mind was razor-sharp, fueled by a burning need for truth. The interrogation had left her shaken, Michael Leu's accusations echoing in her ears, his blind defense of Emily a fresh wound. Yet the emergency intel about Zone 7, where she'd suspected enemy activity, kept her alert. She'd survived the ambush, delivered critical evidence, and now, despite the pain, she couldn't rest. The 2nd Battalion was at risk, and Emily's treachery was the key to unraveling it. As nurses changed her dressings, a familiar voice drifted through the tent's thin walls, Emily's low and urgent speaking into a hidden device. Michael's gone to Zone 7. Tell the boss to relocate now. Julia's heart raced, her suspicions confirmed. Emily wasn't just a performer caught in the crossfire. She was actively betraying the regiment. Ignoring the searing pain in her leg, Julia forced herself upright, gripping the cot's edge. She had to act not for Michael, but for the comrades she'd sworn to protect. Supporting herself against the wall, Julia limped to the tent's entrance, her vision swimming, but her resolve unshaken. The camp was cloaked in dusk, the sky a bruise of purple and gray. She spotted Emily slipping into a temporary medical tent, her movements furtive. Julia followed, staying low, her injured leg dragging, but silent on the soft earth. Through a gap in the tent's fabric, she saw Emily kneel beside an accordion case, deftly removing its back panel to reveal a compact radio detonator. Julia's breath caught. This was the proof she needed. Julia pushed into the tent, gathering her strength, her voice cutting through the stillness. I heard you, Emily. You're sending intel to the enemy. Emily whirled her delicate features, twisting in shock, but she quickly masked it with a shaky smile. Julia, you're mistaken. I'm just checking my equipment. Her voice was syrupy, but her eyes darted to the detonator, betraying her panic. Julia stepped closer, her legs screaming in protest. Don't lie. I intercepted your message. Zone 7's a trap and you're setting it. Emily's facade crumbled, her voice sharp. You don't understand, Julia. You never could. She clutched the detonator, her hands trembling. I didn't choose this. They captured me during a performance mission, threatened my family, and promised me money and safety. I had to survive. Her confession spilled out raw and desperate. The bandits offered me a way out, a life away from this war. I gave them the operation's details, but only to save myself. Julia's blood ran cold. Emily's betrayal wasn't just personal. It had cost lives and endangered the regiment. You sold us out, Julia said, her voice low with fury. You used Michael, led him to abandon the mission, and got me shot. Emily's eyes glistened, but her tears felt hollow. I didn't mean for you to get hurt, she said. Michael was supposed to save me, not leave you, but you're too stubborn, always in the way. The words stung, but Julia's focus was on the detonator. She lunged, her injured leg buckling, but her hands closed around Emily's wrist. They struggled, Emily's nails clawing at Julia's arm, drawing blood. Pain exploded from Julia's wound, her bandages soaking red, but she held fast. She wrenched the detonator free with a desperate twist, her training kicking in. I'm a reconnaissance officer, she hissed. I can work this in my sleep. Adjusting the frequency, she keyed a coded message to Michael Zone 7 trap. Evacuate immediately. Emily shrieked, lunging to snatch the device back. You'll ruin everything. Their struggle was fierce in the cramped tent. Emily's desperation clashed with Julia's resolve. Blood seeped from Julia's leg, her vision blurring, but she shielded the detonator, her fingers flying over the keys. A familiar response frequency crackled Michael's. Abort mission, Julia transmitted using an old cipher they'd shared in better days, praying he'd remember. Emily slammed her hand onto the keypad, sending jumbled signals, but Julia's message was sent. Julia slumped against the tent wall, exhausted, still gripping Emily's wrist. It's over, she said, her voice hoarse. Emily's face contorted, her voice venomous. Michael will never believe you. He trusts me, not you. But Julia ignored her, focusing on the distant sound of gunfire erupting in the hills, sharp, intense, followed by sirens. The enemy had been intercepted, likely due to her warning. Emily froze, her face draining of color. What's happening? She whispered, her voice hollow. Julia's lips curved in a grim smile. Your boss didn't relocate in time. Julia tore a strip from her shirt, scribbling a distress note with the pencil she always carried. She stuffed it into a supply crate, an emergency drop point for the communications unit. Her strength was fading, but she'd done her duty. Her weapons now were the detonator, the intercepted message, and Emily's confession. As she bound Emily's hands with her uniform's rope, Julia's vision darkened, pain overwhelming her. But she held on, her heart steady with the certainty that the truth was out. The regiment would know Emily's betrayal, and Julia's sacrifice would not be in vain. The medical tent's dim light flickered as Julia Lane slumped against its canvas wall, her bandaged leg soaked with fresh blood, her breath ragged from the struggle with Emily. The radio detonator lay in her lap, its keys still warm from her frantic transmission to Michael Leu, warning him of the trap in Zone 7. Emily, her wrists bound with Julia's uniform rope, sat defeated, her face pale, her eyes darting like a cornered animal's. Outside, the night was alive with chaos. Gunfire crackled in the distance, sharp and relentless, followed by the wail of sirens. Julia's heart pounded, hope mingling with exhaustion. Her coded message had reached Michael. The enemy's interception suggested her warning had hit its mark. The tent flap burst open and 2 soldiers rushed in, their rifles slung across their backs. Lieutenant Lane, we got your distress note 1, said his voice urgent. The enemy's been engaged in Zone 7. Our forces caught them mid-relocation. Julia exhaled, relief flooding her. Her transmission, sent through pain and fading strength, had saved the battalion from another ambush. The soldiers secured Emily, one lifting her to her feet, while the other checked Julia's wound, his hands swift but gentle. We need to get you to the hospital, he said, but Julia shook her head, her voice hoarse. Take the detonator and her, it's evidence. As they carried her on a stretcher back to the military hospital, the camp buzzed with frenetic energy. Soldiers ran past shouting coordinates, their faces grim but determined. The gunfire's intensity had lessened, a sign the enemy was retreating. Julia clutched the bandage with the preserved footprint, her proof of Emily's treachery, her mind racing despite the pain. She'd exposed a traitor, but the cost her injury, her trust in Michael. The lives lost weighed heavily. The hospital's sterile scent greeted her as they wheeled her in, nurses rushing to stabilize her leg. She closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her, but the fight wasn't over. Hours later, Major Ellison, the lead inspector from the interrogation, entered the ward, his face less stern than before. Behind him stood Captain Ruiz, holding a stack of communication logs. Lieutenant Lane Ellison began, his voice steady. Your warning about Zone 7 was critical. Our forces intercepted the enemy, preventing a larger operation. The radio detonator and your note led us to seize their communication equipment. He paused, his gray eyes meeting hers. The logs confirm multiple exchanges between the performer Emily and enemy contacts. She leaked the 107 operations details. Julia's chest tightened, vindication bittersweet. She'd been right, but the truth had come at a price. She confessed in the tent, Julia said, her voice weak but firm. She was coerced during a performance mission, threatened, bribed with money, and threatened with safety. She chose to betray us. Ellison nodded, his expression grave. We've taken her into custody. She's admitted everything, claiming she had no choice, but her actions cost lives and she'll face a tribunal. Ruiz stepped forward, his earlier skepticism replaced by respect. Lane, we owe you an apology, he said. We questioned your report and leaned too hard on Captain Leu's account. The regiment's protocols failed to catch this sooner. Your evidence, the battery, the footprint, the logs forced us to look deeper. He hesitated, his voice softening. We're revising our oversight procedures to prevent this kind of lapse. You've done the battalion a service. The acknowledgement was a weight lifted, but Julia's thoughts drifted to the soldiers lost in the failed operation, their faces flashing in her mind. What about Captain Leu? She asked, her voice steady despite the ache in her heart. Michael's blind trust in Emily has enabled this betrayal, and his actions cost the mission and nearly her life. Ellison's jaw tightened. He's under investigation for his role in delaying the operation. His report contradicted yours, but the logs corroborate your account. He'll answer for his decisions. The ward door opened and Michael appeared, his uniform disheveled, his green eyes haunted. He'd returned from Zone 7 and his recon mission was successful, but overshadowed by the truth unfolding. He approached her bedside, his voice low. Julia, I didn't know. I thought Emily was innocent. I'm sorry. His words were heavy with guilt, but they felt hollow to Julia. She looked at him, the man who'd once been her partner, now a stranger undone by his own choices. Your apology doesn't bring back our comrades, she said, her voice cold. You chose her over the mission over me. Michael's face crumpled, but Julia turned away, focusing on the window where dawn's light crept in. The inspection team's validation was a triumph, but it couldn't erase the scars, physical or otherwise. Ellison cleared his throat. Lieutenant Lane, your actions saved lives. The regiment commends you and will ensure your recovery is prioritized. He saluted, a rare gesture, and left with Ruiz, their footsteps fading. Alone, Julia let out a shaky breath. Emily's betrayal was exposed, the truth laid bare, but the victory was bittersweet. The regiment had failed her, blinded by loyalty to Michael, yet her persistence had forced change. As she closed her eyes, the pain in her leg dulled by exhaustion, she felt a flicker of pride. She'd fought for the truth for her comrades, and won. The road to healing body and soul lay ahead, but Julia knew she'd face it with the same courage that had carried her through the darkest night. The military hospital's sterile quiet starkly contrasted with the turmoil in Julia Lane's heart. Her bandaged leg, still tender from the bullet wound, rested on the cot, but the deeper pain was the betrayal that lingered like a shadow. The truth about Emily's treachery had been exposed, her confession, and the seized communication logs vindicating Julia's relentless fight. The 2nd Battalion was safe, the enemy's plans thwarted, but the cost, lives, lost trust, shattered, weighed heavily. As dawn filtered through the ward's window, casting pale light across her face, Julia felt a flicker of pride amidst the exhaustion. She'd done her duty, but the personal wounds remained raw. Captain Michael Leu entered the ward, his uniform rumpled, his green eyes heavy with guilt. The man who'd once been her partner, her love now seemed diminished. His broad shoulders slumped under the weight of his mistakes. He'd returned from Zone 7, his recon mission a success, but the truth of Emily's betrayal had unraveled his world. He approached her bedside, his voice low and thick with emotion. Julia, I was wrong. I didn't know Emily was deceiving me. I let you down and I'm sorry. I thought I was saving lives, but I hurt you most of all. Julia's dark eyes met his, her expression unyielding. She remembered the Ridge mission 2 years ago, his hand steadying her under enemy fire, the pocket watch he'd entrusted her as a vow. That Michael was gone, replaced by the man who'd chosen Emily, flashing the Jeep's headlights to guide her, leaving Julia to bleed in an ambush. His apology, sincere as it might be, couldn't erase the lives lost or the pain of his accusations. Your choices cost the battalion, she said, her voice cold. You left me in that ravine, took my radio, and believed her lies over my truth. Sorry doesn't fix that. Michael flinched, his hand reaching for hers, but she pulled away the movement, sending a jolt of pain through her leg. Please, Julia, he said, his voice breaking. I filled out a new marriage application. Let's start over right here at the base. I know I messed up, but I care about you. I'll make this right. He pulled the silver pocket watch from his pocket, its surface gleaming, faintly symbolizing their past. This belongs with you. Let's rebuild what we had. Julia's gaze fell on the watch, and a bitter laugh escaped her. You said I was your fallback, Michael. If Emily hadn't left, I'd never have been your choice. Now she's gone and you think I'll settle for being second best again? She pushed the watch back toward him, her fingers steady. I gave that back to you when you ran to her. We're done. Her words were a blade cutting through the last threads of their bond. Michael's face paled, his hand trembling as he clutched the watch, unable to respond. The ward door opened, and Major Ellison, the lead inspector, entered his presence, commanding. Lieutenant Lane, he said, his voice formal but warm. On behalf of the Border Regiment, I commend you for your actions. Your evidence and warning saved countless lives. The failure in our deployment caused your injury, and I apologize. The regiment is revising its protocols to ensure this doesn't happen again. If you need anything, come to me. He saluted, a gesture of respect that warmed Julia's chest, validating her sacrifice. I've submitted a transfer request, Julia said, her voice firm. The Southwest's climate isn't suited for my recovery. I need a fresh start somewhere I can heal. Ellison nodded, his expression understanding. Approved. You've earned it, Lane. The North will be lucky to have you. He left, leaving a quiet pride in his wake. Julia's decision was practical. Her leg needed a milder climate, but it was also a step toward reclaiming herself away from the memories of betrayal. Michael's eyes widened, panic flickering. Julia, you're leaving? Please give me a chance to fix this. She met his gaze, unflinching. You had your chance, Michael. When you left me in that ravine, when you took my radio to answer her call, when you accused me of lying, you made your choice. There's no future for us. Each word was a nail sealing the coffin of their past. Michael's face crumpled, but Julia felt no regret, only a quiet strength growing within her. As he left, his footsteps heavy, Julia leaned back, her thoughts drifting to the new unit awaiting her in the north. She imagined the crisp air, the familiar accents, the camaraderie of soldiers who'd judge her for her actions, not her past. The pain of Michael's betrayal still lingered, but so did the warmth of her new team's welcome. A letter from her future commander tucked in her pocket, praising her record. She'd lost love, but gained something more substantial, her resilience, her truth. As she closed her eyes, a faint smile curved her lips. Healing would come not just for her leg, but for her heart, one determined step at a time. The northern air was crisp, a sharp contrast to the humid weight of the southwest border. Julia Lane stood on the platform of a small train station, her crutches steady under her arms, her bandaged leg healing under the care of her new unit's medics. The landscape stretched wide, rolling hills, dusted with frost, the sky a clear, endless blue. Her transfer to the Northern Regiment had been swift, approved by Major Ellison, with a commendation that still warmed her chest. The 2nd Battalion, with its memories of betrayal and loss, was a fading echo replaced by the promise of a fresh start. Julia's dark hair, pulled into a neat bun, caught the breeze, and she breathed deeply, feeling her nerves strained for so long begin to unfurl. Her new unit, the 14th Northern Reconnaissance Corps, had welcomed her with quiet respect. The commander, a gruff but kind woman named Colonel Hargrove, had read Julia's file and shaken her hand firmly. Your work in the Southwest saved lives, Lane, she'd said. We need scouts like you. The words had grounded Julia, a reminder that her worth wasn't tied to Michael Leu or the pain he'd caused. Her first days were spent in briefings, learning the northern terrain, her comrades' accents, a familiar comfort, their camaraderie, a balm. Around a mess hall table, sharing stories of past missions, Julia felt a spark of belonging, a sense that she could rebuild here. Yet the past lingered. A package arrived at her quarters, its weight heavy in her hands. Inside was the silver pocket watch, its face restored, its hands ticking with cold precision. Beside it lay a thick envelope, Michael's handwriting unmistakable on the address. Julia's heart tightened, memories flooding back the Ridge mission where he'd pressed the watch into her palm, their shared dreams of a future now shattered by his choice to save Emily, leaving Julia to bleed in an ambush. She didn't open the letter. Instead, she picked up a pen and wrote on the return slip, "Refused, return to sender." Sealing the box, she handed it to the courier, her hands steady, her resolve unshaken. Once a symbol of love, the watch was now a relic of betrayal, its cracks invisible but indelible. Word from the Southwest reached her through official channels. Michael Leu had faced a court-martial, and his negligence in the 107 anti-bandit operation was laid bare. Emily's confession and the communication logs had sealed his fate. He'd delayed the mission for personal reasons, costing lives and compromising the regiment. The tribunal sentenced him to imprisonment, stripping him of his rank. Julia felt no satisfaction, only a quiet finality. Michael had lost his honor career, everything he'd once valued, just as he'd lost her when he chose Emily over the mission. His frantic dash to the train station, hoping to catch her before she left, had failed, met not by her forgiveness, but by the cold handcuffs of the inspection unit. Julia's leg was healing, but the pain was now a dull ache manageable with physical therapy. But her heart's recovery was slower, a journey she navigated with small, deliberate steps. Late one evening, she sat by her bunk, a letter from a new comrade, Private Lynn, open before her. Lynn had shared a story of her own, a lost brother, a rebuilt life, inviting Julia to join her for a hike once her leg was stronger. The gesture, genuine but straightforward, stirred something in Julia. She wasn't alone here. The North offered not just a new unit, but a chance to redefine herself, to find strength beyond the scars of betrayal. Standing on the platform now, Julia watched a train rumble into the distance, its whistle a soft farewell to the border she'd left behind. The familiar Southwest scenery, its dust, heat, and pain, had no hold on her anymore. She thought of the soldiers lost in the failed operation, their names etched in her memory, and vowed to honor them through her work. The North was her canvas, its challenges a call to the reconnaissance officer she'd always been. She adjusted her crutches, her gaze lifting to the horizon where the hills promised new paths. A small but genuine smile flickered on her lips as she turned toward her new quarters. The weight of Michael's watch, of his betrayal, was gone, replaced by the lightness of purpose. Julia Lane was no longer defined by who she'd loved or what she'd lost, but by what she'd fought for and won: her truth, her resilience, her future. With the northern wind at her back, she took her first steps forward, ready to write a new chapter where she was enough.